Waitress slipped note to the Sicilian mafia boss. Your ex-fiancée sold you out. Back exit, come now. The rain in Harborview did not wash the city clean. It only made the grime slicker, reflecting the neon signs of the Port District in puddles that looked like spilled oil. Inside Trattoria Marinella, the air was thick with the scent of garlic, roasting rosemary, and the damp wool of coats drying on the rack by the door. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow night, but the heaviness in the room had nothing to do with the weather or the day of the week. Maya Collins shifted her weight from one aching foot to the other, leaning her hip against the service station counter. Her apron, once crisp white at the start of her double shift, now bore the faint, honorable stains of marinara and balsamic glaze. She was exhausted, a bone-deep weariness that made her eyelids feel like lead weights, but her eyes remained sharp. You had to be observant to be a good waitress, to know when a glass needed refilling before the customer asked, or when a couple was fighting silently and needed space. Tonight. However, her observation skills were picking up on something far more volatile than a domestic dispute. Table 4 was the problem. They were not regulars. The regulars were the old men playing cards in the corner, nursing espressos for 3 hours, or the tired dock workers who came in for the late-night pasta specials. The 4 men at table 4 were entirely different. They wore suits that were expensive but ill-fitting, straining at the shoulders and the waist, as if concealing something bulkier than a wallet. They had barely touched their food. Their eyes did not linger on the warmth of the decor or the framed photos of the owner's grandchildren. Instead, they watched the front door with the predatory intensity of hawks circling a field. The silence between them was strained, a taut wire ready to snap. Every time the kitchen door swung open, 2 of them would flinch, their hands twitching beneath the tablecloth. Maya wiped a spot on the counter, her stomach churning with an instinct she could not quite name. It felt like the drop in atmospheric pressure before a tornado touched down. Then the brass bell above the entrance chimed, clear and bright, cutting through the low murmur of the dining room. The wind from the harbor swept in, cold and biting, followed by a man who seemed to command the elements rather than endure them. Luca Santori stepped inside. The reaction in the room was immediate and subtle. The air seemed to leave the space, sucked out by the sheer gravity of his presence. Maya froze, her rag hovering over the mahogany. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in Harborview knew the face of Luca Santori, even if the newspapers only ever printed grainy photos taken from a distance. In person, he was terrifyingly striking. He was tall, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that made the other men in the room look clumsy. His coat was black wool, tailored to perfection, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they looked like endless tunnels. He was the head of the Santori crime family, the man who supposedly held the city's politicians and police force in the palm of his hand. He moved to the private booth in the back, the one usually reserved for the owner's family. 2 men accompanied him, walking a respectful 3 paces behind. They were large, serious men, but compared to Luca, they faded into the background. Maya watched, a mix of fear and strange fascination rooting her to the spot. This was a man who ordered deaths as easily as he ordered coffee, yet he sat with a quiet, controlled elegance that was almost hypnotic. He did not look around the room frantically like the men at table 4. He looked like a king surveying a very small, insignificant kingdom. The manager, Marco, snapped his fingers at Maya, his face pale. "Table 7, he hissed, jerking his chin toward Luca. "Do not make eye contact. Just water and the menu. Go." Maya swallowed hard, smoothing her apron. She grabbed the water pitcher, her hands trembling slightly, and forced herself to walk across the dining floor. As she passed table 4, she felt the gaze of the tense men track her, then slide past her to lock onto Luca. The hostility radiating from them was hot enough to burn. When she reached Luca's table, he was unbuttoning his coat. Up close, the danger clinging to him was palpable. A scent of expensive cologne and cold steel. "Good evening," Maya said, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. "Start you with some water." Luca looked up. For a second, his eyes met hers, and Maya felt a jolt go through her chest. He did not look at her like she was a servant. He looked at her with a detached curiosity, analyzing her in a microsecond. "Please," Luca said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and cultured, lacking the rough edge she expected from a mobster. She poured the water, careful not to spill a drop. His bodyguards stood near the booth's entrance, scanning the room, but they maintained that tiny, respectful distance, as if they knew their boss required space. "I will have the espresso," Luca added, closing the menu without looking at it, "and the focaccia. If it is fresh, it is," Maya managed to say. "I will bring it right out." She turned and walked away. Feeling his gaze on her back for a heartbeat before he turned his attention to his phone, Maya pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, the noise and heat hitting her instantly. The chefs were shouting orders, pans were clashing, but Maya's mind was still out in the dining room. She needed to get the bread. She needed to calm down. She moved toward the service entrance at the back of the kitchen to grab a fresh basket from the warming rack. The back hallway was dimly lit, a narrow corridor leading to the alley where deliveries were made. The heavy steel door was usually propped open to let the heat escape, but tonight it was closed. As she reached for the bread, she heard a voice. It was low, hushed, coming from just inside the service alcove near the back door. She paused. It was one of the men from table 4, the one with the scar on his chin. He was speaking into a phone, his hand cupped over his mouth, his back to her. "He is seated," the man whispered. The aggression in his voice was gone, replaced by a cold, professional tone. "We're just waiting for the signal." Maya held her breath, pressing herself against the stainless steel refrigerator. "Yeah," the man continued. "When he stands up, we shoot, crossfire. He has nowhere to go." Maya's blood ran cold. The tray in her hand rattled slightly, and she clamped her fingers down on it to stop the noise. "And the back?" the man asked. "Good. Isabella said she is closing the door from the outside. Make sure it is jammed. We want him trapped in the box." Isabella. The name made Maya's skin crawl. Everyone knew Isabella De Luca was Luca Santori's former fiancée. The tabloids had covered their split extensively, calling it the breakup of the century in the criminal underworld. If she was involved, if she was the one locking the doors. The man hung up the phone and adjusted his jacket. Maya saw the glint of a gun barrel tucked into his waistband before he turned and slipped back into the dining room, unnoticed by the cooks. Maya stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They were going to kill him. Not just kill him, they were going to massacre him in the middle of a restaurant full of innocent people. When he stands up, we shoot. She needed to leave. She needed to run out the front door and never look back. This was not her world. These were monsters fighting monsters. And if she got in the middle, she would be crushed. But then she thought of Luca's face. She thought of the polite way he had asked for water. She thought of him sipping espresso, completely unaware that the woman he had once loved had sold him to his executioners. She moved to the small window in the back door and peered through the grime-streaked glass into the alley. Her breath hitched. A black sedan was idling with its lights off. 3 men were standing by the dumpster, checking weapons, large weapons, automatic rifles that they were tucking under long trench coats. It was a kill box. The restaurant was surrounded. Maya pulled back from the window, her legs shaking so hard she had to lean against the prep table. Panic clawed at her throat. If she did nothing, Luca Santori would be dead in 10 minutes, maybe 5. And who knew how many bystanders would catch a stray bullet? She looked at the golden, crusty focaccia in the basket. She looked at the dining room doors. She could not just let it happen. She was terrified, yes, but her moral instinct was a stubborn, immovable thing. She remembered the empathy she felt when he looked at her. A man, not just a headline. Her hands trembling. She snatched her small order pad from her apron pocket. She grabbed a pen, her fingers slippery with sweat. She had to be fast. She had to be clear. She wrote the words, pressing down so hard the pen nearly tore the paper. Your ex-fiancé sold you out. Men with guns. Back exit now. She stared at the words. They looked ridiculous. They looked like something from a movie. But they were the only truth that mattered right now. She tore the page from the pad. With deliberate, careful hands, she folded the note into a small, tight square. She nestled it deep into the bread basket, tucking it between 2 warm slices of rosemary focaccia so it was hidden but would be found the moment he reached for a piece. She felt like she was handling a grenade. By doing this, she was crossing a line she could never uncross. She was interfering in mafia business. Take a breath. Maya, she whispered to herself, just serve the bread. She pushed through the swinging doors again. The dining room seemed louder now, the clinking of silverware sounding like gunshots to her heightened senses. She walked toward table 7. The walk felt like it took 100 years. Every step was a battle against the urge to drop the basket and scream. She reached Luca's table. He was looking at his phone, his expression bored. One of his bodyguards was watching the front door. The other was watching the kitchen. Maya forced a smile onto her face. It felt brittle, like a mask that might crack. "Here you are, sir," she said, her voice dropping to a murmur that barely carried over the ambient noise. "Fresh from the oven." She placed the basket directly in front of him, her hand lingering on the rim for a fraction of a second too long. Luca looked up, sensing the shift in her demeanor. He saw the tension in her neck, the slight tremor in the hand she withdrew. He looked at the bread basket, then back at her face. Her eyes were wide, frightened, pleading with him to understand. He reached into the basket. Maya took a step back, holding her breath. Luca's long fingers brushed the bread and found the paper. He paused. He did not pull it out immediately. He kept his hand inside the basket, unfolding the note by feel, shielding it from the view of the room. Then, with a casual motion that looked like he was simply checking the bread, he glanced down. He read the message. Maya watched the transformation. It was terrifying. His jaw tightened, the muscle feathering beneath the skin. His pupils narrowed into pinpricks, the boredom vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, lethal calculation. The air around him seemed to crackle with sudden, violent electricity. He did not look at table 4. He did not look at the windows. He shifted his position in the booth, his legs bracing, his right hand drifting imperceptibly toward the inside of his jacket. He looked up at Maya. It was a loaded glance, heavy with acknowledgement. There was no warmth in it, but there was a flicker of something else. Respect. Perhaps, or a debt recorded. "Thank you," Luca said softly. The words were ordinary, but the tone was final. He stood up. He did not rush. He rose with a smooth, fluid motion that drew no attention from the casual observer, but alerted every predator in the room. Maya's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She turned, pretending to check on table 5, but her entire body was braced for impact. Luca signaled his men with a single, sharp tilt of his head. They moved instantly, flanking him. He did not head for the front door. He turned toward the kitchen hallway. The man with the scar at table 4 realized what was happening. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "He's moving," the man shouted. The illusion of peace shattered. A gunshot cracked through the air, deafening in the enclosed space. A vase on a nearby table exploded, showering patrons with water and glass. Screams erupted. The dining room dissolved into chaos as people dove under tables, scrambling over one another in blind panic. Luca's bodyguard pulled a gun from his jacket, firing 2 shots toward table 4 to provide cover. "Get down!" someone screamed. Luca did not duck. He moved with terrifying purpose, striding toward the kitchen. As he passed Maya, he didn't just run past her. He reached out, his hand clamped around her wrist like an iron manacle. The grip was bruising, painful, and undeniable. He yanked her toward him, pulling her off balance and dragging her through the swinging doors into the kitchen just as a hail of bullets shredded the wood where she had been standing a second before. The kitchen staff was screaming, cowering behind the stainless steel counters. Luca did not stop. He pulled Maya along, his stride long and urgent, navigating the maze of prep tables. "Let me go!" Maya gasped, stumbling to keep up with him. She tried to wrench her wrist free, terror seizing her. She had saved him, but she hadn't signed up to be kidnapped. Luca shoved open the heavy service door, the one he now knew was a trap. Thanks to her, he paused for a split second, looking at the door, then at the layout of the kitchen. He kicked a heavy prep table over to block the entrance behind them, buying them seconds. He turned to her, his face inches from hers. The adrenaline made his eyes burn with a dark, intense fire. "You come with me now, or you don't get out at all," Luca growled, his voice low and urgent, cutting through the noise of the gunfire behind them. "They saw you give me the note. You are a liability now." Maya stared at him, the reality crashing down on her. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was an accomplice. The sound of boots pounding on the dining room floor grew louder. "Move," Luca commanded. He didn't wait for her answer. He tightened his grip on her wrist and kicked the back door open, dragging her out into the rainy, gun-filled alley and into a night that would change her life forever. The metal door slammed open against the brick exterior, the sound lost instantly in the crack of gunfire that erupted from the shadows. The alley behind Trattoria Marinella was a narrow throat of darkness, slick with rain and smelling of wet garbage and ozone. Maya stumbled as her boots hit the uneven pavement, her breath hitching in a terrified sob. But Luca Santori did not let her fall. His hand was a solid, unyielding weight at the small of her back, propelling her forward with a force that brooked no resistance. "Get down," Luca commanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated against her ear. Maya flinched violently as a bullet chipped the brickwork inches above her head, sending a spray of red dust into the rain. She instinctively curled in on herself, burying her face in her coat. But Luca was there, his large frame interposing itself between her and the shooters stationed near the dumpster. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion, one arm shielding her, the other raising a sleek, dark pistol that fired 2 controlled shots into the darkness. A man shouted in pain, the sound wet and guttural. Another one of Luca's men, the bodyguard who had been by the door, was already returning fire, covering their retreat. "The car," Maya gasped, her eyes darting frantically. A black sedan screeched around the corner of the alley, tires spinning on the wet asphalt before gripping. The back door flew open before the vehicle had even come to a full stop. Inside, Luca shoved her. She scrambled across the leather seats, her limbs tangling, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Luca dove in after her, pulling the door shut with a heavy thud that sealed out the noise of the gunfire. "Go!" Luca barked at the driver. The car surged forward, pinning Maya against the seat. She watched through the rain-streaked rear window as the alley receded, the flashing muzzle flares disappearing into the gloom. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, her hands gripping her knees until her knuckles turned white. She was alive. But as the adrenaline began to recede, a cold, creeping dread took its place. She turned her head slowly to look at the man beside her. Luca Santori sat in the corner of the seat, his chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. He was reloading his weapon, his movements precise and calm, as if he were merely adjusting a watch. He slid the magazine home with a sharp click, then holstered the gun inside his jacket. Only then did he look at her. The interior of the car was dark, illuminated only by the passing streetlights that sliced across his face in rhythmic intervals. In those flashes of amber light, his eyes were devoid of gratitude. They were cold, calculating, and intensely suspicious. "Who are you?" Luca asked. The question was soft, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a sentence. "I am Maya," she stammered, her voice thin. "I am just a waitress." "Just a waitress," repeated the man in the front passenger seat. It was Nico, the bodyguard who had eyed her with suspicion back at the restaurant. He turned around, his thick neck straining against his collar, a gun resting casually on his thigh. "A waitress who knows exactly when a hit is going to go down," Nico spat. "A waitress who knows about back exits and crossfires. Who paid you? Was it the Valentis? Or did Isabella send you to make it look like a rescue so she could get him later?" "No!" Maya cried, shrinking back against the door. "I do not know any of those people." "Then how did you know?" Luca cut in. His voice was sharper now. demanding. "You wrote a note. You knew Isabella was involved. You knew about the guns. Explain. Now." Maya swallowed hard, trying to moisten her dry throat. The car swerved around a corner, throwing her slightly toward him, but she scrambled back to her side. "I went to the back to get more bread," she explained, the words tumbling out in a rush. The service door was closed, but I heard a man talking on the phone. He was one of the men at table 4, the one with the scar. Luca's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "He said they were waiting for you to stand up," Maya said, her voice trembling but gaining strength as she focused on the truth. "He said, when you stood up, they would shoot." He mentioned a crossfire. And then he said Isabella was closing the door from the outside to trap you in the box. Silence filled the car, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Luca stared at her, dissecting every micro-expression on her face. He was looking for the tell, the flicker of a lie, the shift in gaze that would betray a rehearsed story. But Maya looked back at him with wide, terrified eyes that held nothing but raw honesty. She saw the car in the alley, too, she added, whispering. "I looked out the window. Men with guns under their coats. I could not just let you die." Nico snorted from the front seat. "She is a plant. Boss," Nico insisted. "It is too convenient. No civilian risks their neck for a guy like you unless there is money on the table." Luca did not answer Nico immediately. He kept his gaze locked on Maya. He saw the way her hands were shaking in her lap, the tremors violent and uncontrollable. He saw the genuine pallor of her skin, the way she was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. This was not the composure of an assassin or a spy. This was the sheer, unadulterated panic of a normal person dropped into a war zone. Luca reached into the side compartment of the door and pulled out a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap, the plastic cracking loudly in the quiet car. "Drink," Luca said, extending the bottle toward her. Maya looked at the water, then at him, hesitant. "It is just water," Luca said, his tone softening by a fraction of a degree. "You are in shock." Maya reached out, her hand trembling so badly she almost dropped the bottle. As her fingers closed around the plastic, they brushed against his. The contact was brief, lasting less than a second, but it sent a shockwave through her that had nothing to do with fear. His skin was warm, his grip steady and grounding. It was an unwelcome warmth, an undeniable connection that flared up her arm and settled in her chest. She snatched the bottle away, bringing it to her lips and drinking greedily, the cool liquid soothing the raw dryness of her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Luca watched her, his expression unreadable. He had spent his life reading people, looking for the knife behind the smile. But in this woman, this terrified waitress in a stained apron, he found only a confusing transparency. "Check her background," Luca said to Nico, leaning back against the leather seat. "Name, address, family. I want to know everything by the time we stop." Maya lowered the bottle. "I have to go home," she said, her voice rising in panic. "My shift. My mother calls me at midnight. I have to go home." "You are not going home," Luca said flatly. "Not tonight, but if the men at the restaurant saw you pass me that note, and they did." "Then you are a target," Luca interrupted, his voice devoid of pity but heavy with fact. "They know you helped me. If I drop you off at your apartment, you will be dead by morning." The words hung in the air, brutal and final. Maya slumped back against the seat, the reality of her situation crushing the air from her lungs. She had saved a life, and in doing so, she had forfeited her own. The car ride stretched on for another 20 minutes, winding away from the city center and the flashing lights of the harbor. The urban landscape gave way to quieter, darker streets lined with trees. They eventually turned down a long, gravel driveway leading to a house that sat isolated on a wooded lot. It looked like a normal house, a 2-story colonial with a porch and a manicured lawn. But as the car approached, Maya noticed the details that marked it as something else. The floodlights that snapped on were too bright. The fence surrounding the perimeter was too high. And the men standing by the front door were holding rifles, not rakes. "We are here," Nico announced, parking the car near the garage. Luca opened the door and stepped out into the drizzle. then turned and offered a hand to Maya. She hesitated, looking at his large, open palm, then at the armed men by the porch. She had no choice. She took his hand. His grip was firm as he helped her out of the car, pulling her close to his side as they walked toward the house. It was a possessive gesture, protective, signaling to the men on the porch that she was with him inside. The safe house was a hive of activity. The air smelled of stale coffee and gun oil. Men moved through the hallways with urgent purpose, carrying phones and laptops. When Luca entered, the activity ceased for a heartbeat. Every eye turned to him, then to the woman in the waitress uniform standing beside him. Their gazes were heavy, assessing. To them, she was a variable, a risk, a ticking bomb that had been brought into their sanctuary. "Take her to the back room," Luca ordered Nico. "Get her some dry clothes. I need 10 minutes to brief the captains." Nico nodded and gestured for Maya to follow him. She cast one last, desperate look at Luca, but he was already turning away, surrounded by his lieutenants, his voice dropping into a low, authoritative register that excluded her completely. Maya was led down a hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was sparse, furnished only with a single bed, a wooden chair, and a small table. Nico tossed a bundle of oversized clothes, gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, onto the bed. "Stay here," Nico said. "Do not open the door." He left, closing the door with a click that sounded ominously like a lock engaging. Maya stood in the center of the room, the silence pressing in on her. Her legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. She looked down at her hands. They were still stained with ink from the order pad and flour from the bread basket. The dam broke. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the tears came. Hot, stinging tears of terror and exhaustion. She cried for the quiet life she had lost in the span of an hour. She cried for the fear that was clawing at her stomach. She cried because she was in a house full of killers, and the only person she felt remotely safe with was the man they took orders from. She did not hear the door open. She only realized she was not alone when she sensed a shift in the air, a presence that filled the small room. She looked up, hastily wiping at her cheeks, humiliated to be caught weeping. Luca stood in the doorway. He had removed his wet coat and suit jacket. He was now in a white dress shirt, the top buttons undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked tired. The invincible armor of the mafia boss had slipped, just a fraction revealing a man who had almost died. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping inside and closing the door softly behind him. "I brought you something to eat," he said. He placed a plate of bread and cheese on the small table. It was a meager offering, but the gesture was unexpectedly human. "I am not hungry," Maya whispered, her voice thick with tears. Luca leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. He looked at her, really looked at her, stripping away the suspicion that Nico had been feeding him. He saw a woman who was terrified. Yes, but who had stood in a line of fire to save a stranger. "Why did you do it?" Luca asked quietly. Maya looked down at her hands. "I do not know." "You risked your life," Luca pressed, his voice low. "You knew what I was. You knew what those men were. You could have walked out the front door and gone home to your mother. Why didn't you?" I tried to leave," Maya admitted, her voice trembling. "I wanted to run. But then I saw you sitting there. You were drinking your espresso. You looked so calm. And I thought about how unfair it was to be shot in the back while you were eating bread. It was cowardly." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "I could not watch you get murdered," she said, her voice cracking with raw sincerity. "I just could not do it. It was wrong." Luca stared at her. He was used to people doing things for money, for power, for fear, or for leverage. He was used to calculated kindness. He had forgotten what simple, moral courage looked like. It disarmed him completely. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He pushed off the wall and moved toward her. Maya stiffened, her breath catching in her throat, but he did not stop until he was standing right in front of her. "Thank you," Luca said. The words were low, vibrating in the small space between them. He was close enough that she could smell the rain on his skin and the faint scent of tobacco. He reached out. Maya froze, every nerve in her body singing with a high-tension warning. Luca lifted his hand and gently, with a delicacy that seemed impossible for a man of his size, tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingertips barely skimmed her cheek, but the touch seared her skin. It was electric. Maya stopped breathing. She looked up into his dark eyes and saw something there that frightened her more than the guns. She saw a flash of vulnerability. She saw a man who was alone in a crowded room, reaching out to the one person who had seen him as a human being rather than a target. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them. His breath was warm and steady against her forehead. Hers was uneven and quick. The air between them was charged, heavy with an attraction that had no business existing in a safe house surrounded by guards. Then the moment became too much. The power in him, the unexpected tenderness. It was overwhelming. Maya stepped back, her heart racing. "I just did what anyone would have done," she murmured, her voice breathless. Luca let his hand drop, the mask of control sliding back into place, though his eyes remained dark and intense. "No," Luca said softly. "Most people would have run. You are the only one who stayed." He stepped back, putting a safe distance between them, though the energy in the room remained thick. "You need a change," he said, gesturing to the clothes on the bed. "Put those on. We have to wait here until morning. My men are sweeping the city, trying to find out how deep this goes." "I can go home tomorrow?" Maya asked, hope flaring in her chest. Luca hesitated. He looked at her, and for a split second, she saw a conflict war behind his eyes. He wanted to keep her safe, but deeper than that, hidden in the shadows of his conscience, he simply wanted to keep her. She was a light in a very dark world, and he was drawn to it like a moth. "We will see," Luca said evasively. "For now, you stay here." He turned and left the room, leaving Maya alone with the racing of her heart and the ghost of his touch on her cheek. An hour later, the house had quieted down. The frantic energy of the arrival had settled into a watchful, tense silence. Maya, dressed in the oversized sweatpants and t-shirt that smelled faintly of cedar, wandered out of the bedroom. She was too wired to sleep. She found Luca in the kitchen. He was sitting at a small wooden table, a bottle of wine open in front of him, staring at a map of the city spread out on the surface. He looked up when she entered. "I could not sleep," Maya said apologetically. "Sit," Luca invited. Kicking out the chair opposite him, she sat. He poured a small amount of wine into a tumbler and slid it across the table to her. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. "Who is she?" Maya asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. Luca did not pretend not to understand. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes darkening. "Isabella," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "We grew up together. Our families were allied. It was an arrangement, but I thought we understood each other. I thought we wanted the same things." "What happened?" Maya asked, her curiosity overriding her fear. She wanted power, Luca said, his voice tight with old hurt, but she wanted it without the cost. She wanted me to legitimize the business overnight. She did not understand that you cannot just wash blood off money and call it clean. It takes time. She got impatient. He looked at Maya, his gaze intense. "She left me a year ago," he continued. "I let her go. I thought that was the end of it. I did not think she would sell me to the Valentis just to speed up her own timeline." Maya listened, watching the way the light from the hanging bulb cast shadows on his face. She saw the bitterness there, but also the loneliness. He was a man who had everything: money, power, respect, and yet the person closest to him had tried to kill him. "I am sorry," Maya said softly. Luca looked at her, surprised by the genuine sympathy in her tone. He was used to fear. He was used to obedience. He was not used to compassion. "You should not be sorry," Luca said, leaning forward slightly. "You are the one stuck in a safe house because of my mistakes." "I chose to write the note," Maya reminded him. Luca smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that transformed his face, making him look younger, Less dangerous. Yes, he said. You did. They sat there as the night stretched on, sharing the wine and the silence. Maya felt the fear slowly ebbing away, replaced by a dangerously growing attraction to the man sitting across from her. She knew he was dangerous. She knew he was a criminal, but as she watched his hands tracing the lines on the map, she couldn't help but remember how gentle they had been when he tucked her hair back, and that terrified her more than any gun. The morning light that filtered into the safe house was gray and unwilling, suffocated by the heavy cloud cover that hung low over Harborview. In the living room, a large television set mounted on the wall murmured with the morning news. The volume turned low so as not to disturb the hushed, urgent conversations taking place in the kitchen. Maya sat on the edge of a stiff leather sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea she'd forgotten to drink. She stared at the screen, her stomach twisting into tight, painful knots. Breaking news, the anchor announced, her face a mask of practiced concern. Gang violence erupted last night at the popular Trattoria Marinella in the Port District. Police are calling it a targeted assassination attempt linked to organized crime syndicates fighting for control of the harbor. The screen shifted from the anchor to a chaotic scene of flashing blue lights and yellow tape surrounding the restaurant where Maya had worked just 12 hours ago. Then, the image changed again. It was a grainy, black and white still frame taken from a security camera weeks ago. It was blurry, but the face was unmistakable. Authorities are seeking information regarding the whereabouts of Luca Santori, the alleged head of the Santori crime family, who was seen fleeing the scene. The anchor continued. Maya looked from the screen to the hallway leading to the kitchen, seeing his face on the news, plastered next to words like assassination and crime family, stripped away the strange, intimate fog of the previous night. It made the danger sharp and public. She was not just hiding out with a man she had saved, she was harboring a fugitive whose face was currently being beamed into thousands of homes across the city. The sound of heavy boots on hardwood floors drew her attention. Nico marched down the hallway, looking more stressed than he had the night before. He did not even glance at Maya as he passed, his phone pressed to his ear. They are already spinning it, Nico muttered into the phone. Yeah, get the car ready. We might need to move. Maya set her mug down and stood up. She felt useless sitting there, a porcelain doll placed on a shelf while the house burned down. Drawn by a mix of anxiety and curiosity, she moved quietly toward the kitchen. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Luca was standing at the head of the large oak table, his hands braced against the wood, his posture rigid. Nico had joined him, along with two other people who must have arrived while Maya was sleeping. One was a man, broad-shouldered and scarred, whom Luca addressed as Rafa. The other was a woman, elegant and sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. This was Elena. Maya had heard them mention her name the night before. She was the strategist, the mind behind the muscle. It is worse than just a betrayal, Elena was saying, her voice cool and clipped. She tapped a tablet screen, sliding it across the table toward Luca. Isabella is not just working with the Valentis. My contact in the federal building says there is a task force that has been dormant for 6 months. They suddenly woke up yesterday morning. Luca looked down at the tablet, his expression unreadable. So she is squeezing me from both sides. She is trading you, Elena corrected. She gives the Valentis your territory to buy their protection, and she gives the feds your head to buy her immunity. She walks away clean with the money she siphoned off the accounts, and you end up either dead or in a supermax prison. Rafa slammed his fist onto the table, making the coffee cups rattle. We should hit them now. We know where the Valenti lieutenant operates. We send a message. We burn it down. Maya flinched in the hallway. The violence in Rafa's voice was casual, terrifyingly mundane. No, Luca said, his voice low but cutting through Rafa's anger. If we strike blindly, we play right into her hand. The feds are waiting for us to make a noise. If we start a war in the streets today, we give them the justification to sweep us all up. Then what do we do? Nico asked, pacing the small kitchen. We cannot just sit here. We wait, Luca said. We find out exactly what she promised the Valentis, and then we make them a better offer, or we make them realize that Isabella is a liability they cannot afford. And if that does not work, Rafa challenged, then we kill the deal, Luca said coldly. And anyone standing in the way of it? Maya took a sharp breath. The coldness of his tone sent a chill down her spine. This was not the man who had gently tucked her hair behind her ear. This was the boss, the killer. She took a step back, intending to retreat to the living room, but her foot caught the edge of the hallway runner. She stumbled, her hand hitting the wall with a soft thud. The conversation in the kitchen stopped instantly. Maya froze. Maya! Luca's voice came from the room. Come in. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. Nico and Rafa looked annoyed. Elena looked at her with clinical curiosity, as if she were a specimen in a jar. Luca just looked tired. I am sorry, Maya said, her voice small. I heard voices. How much did you hear? Nico asked aggressively. Enough, Luca interjected. He straightened up and nodded to his team. Clear the room, give us a minute, but boss... Nico started. Now, Luca said. The 3 lieutenants gathered their phones and tablets and filed out. Elena paused as she passed Maya, her dark eyes scanning Maya's face. He has a blind spot for strays, Elena murmured, low enough that only Maya could hear. Do not make him regret it. Then she was gone, and Maya was alone with Luca. He walked over to the coffee pot and poured a fresh cup. His movements slow. He did not look angry. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the sky on his shoulders. I did not mean to eavesdrop, Maya said, crossing her arms defensively. I know, Luca said. He turned and leaned against the counter, blowing on the steam rising from his cup. But you heard what we said. You heard Rafa. I heard you talking about killing people like it was a business transaction, Maya said, her honesty pushing through her fear. It is a business transaction, Luca said. In my world, violence is a currency. If you do not spend it, you go bankrupt. That is a terrible way to live, Maya whispered. Luca looked at her, his eyes dark and sorrowful. Do you think I chose this because I enjoy it? I was born into this. Maya. My father was the boss before me, his father before him. There are no clean choices for men like me. There is only the choice that keeps my family alive and the choice that gets them killed. He took a step toward her. Isabella made a choice. He said, she chose to sell me out. If I do not respond, everyone in this room dies. Nico, Rafa, Elena. You? Me? Maya asked. You are a witness, Luca reminded her gently. To the Valentis, you are a loose end. To Isabella, you are the woman who ruined her ambush. You are part of this now, whether you want to be or not. Maya fell silent. She looked at his hands. Hands that could order a death and hands that could offer water to a terrified stranger. The duality of him was confusing, frightening, and magnetic. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke in the late afternoon. The sky turned a bruised purple, and rain began to lash against the windows of the safe house with the force of bullets. Around 5 in the evening, the power grid gave up. The lights in the safe house flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the rooms into a gray gloom. The hum of the refrigerator cut out, leaving a sudden, ringing silence that was only broken by the drumming of the rain. Nico cursed from the other room and began shouting orders about checking the backup generator, but Luca remained in the kitchen with Maya. He moved to a cabinet and pulled out a box of thick, white candles. He lit them one by one, the strike of the match flaring bright in the dimness. He placed one on the small kitchen table and another on the counter. The flickering yellow light softened the hard edges of the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Sit, Luca said, gesturing to the chair. He found a gas burner and managed to heat water for instant coffee. It was a humble, domestic task that seemed at odds with the conversation she had overheard earlier. He brought 2 mugs to the table and sat down across from her. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the eaves of the house, but inside, in the small circle of candlelight, it felt like a sanctuary. Tell me about yourself, Luca said. He was not interrogating her this time. His voice was soft, genuinely curious. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug. There is not much to tell. I serve pasta. I go home. I sleep. That is not true, Luca said. Everyone has a story. Why were you working a double shift on a Tuesday? Maya looked into the flame of the candle. My mother is sick, she said quietly. She lives in a facility about 2 hours from here. It is a good place, but it is expensive. The insurance only covers so much. Luca watched her, his focus intense. What does she have? Early onset dementia, Maya said. Maya. She forgets who I am sometimes, but she is safe there. So I work double shifts. I pick up holidays. I save everything I can. Luca remained silent, but his expression softened. He saw the fatigue under her eyes not as a weakness, but as a badge of honor. He saw the strength it took to keep going when the world gave you nothing but heavy lifting. You are invisible to them, aren't you? Luca asked. The customers? The people you serve? Maya nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. Most of them do not even look at my face. I am just a pair of hands putting down a plate. If I disappeared tomorrow, they would only notice because their coffee was late. I noticed you, Luca said. The words hung in the air, heavier than the thunder outside. Maya looked up, her heart skipping a beat. You were looking at your phone. I saw you, Luca corrected her. I saw how tired you were. I saw how you handled the rude couple at table 3 with grace. And I saw you look at me when you realized what was happening. You were terrified, but you did not look away. He reached across the table. His thumb brushed the back of her hand. It was a lingering caress, rough skin against smooth, sending a jolt of electricity straight to Maya's chest. It was a dangerous touch. It was the touch of a man who took what he wanted, but it was also asking for permission. Maya did not pull away. She let the warmth of his hand seep into hers, spreading through her veins like a slow-moving ache. In the dim light, with the rain hammering against the roof, the lines between their worlds began to blur. He was not a mafia boss, and she was not a waitress. They were just two people trapped in a storm, finding a moment of quiet in the chaos. I am not used to being seen, Maya whispered. You should get used to it, Luca murmured. He stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. The intensity of the moment seemed to have startled even him. He walked over to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds into the rain-swept yard. Maya watched him. She knew she should be afraid. She knew she should be thinking about the gunmen and the federal agents, but all she could think about was the way his hand had felt on hers. Luca stood by the window for a long moment, his back to her. Then he turned. He did not go back to his seat. He walked around the table and stopped beside her chair. He was close, dangerously close. Maya could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the soap he had used, mixed with the scent of the rain and the wax of the candles. She stood up. She did not know why she did it. It was instinct. It was a magnetic pull she could not resist. They stood facing each other in the flickering light. Luca looked down at her, his eyes searching her face, looking for fear, looking for hesitation. Maya, he said, his voice a low rumble. She looked up at him, her breath hitching. She knew what was coming. She had every chance to step back. She could walk away, go to the bedroom, lock the door. She stayed. Luca leaned in slowly. He gave her time. He gave her seconds that felt like hours to push him away. When she did not move, he lifted his hand. He cupped her cheek, his palm warm and rough, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Maya's eyes fluttered shut. Her hands, acting of their own accord, reached out and curled into the fabric of his white shirt. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was slow, tentative. A question asked in the silence of the room. Maya's lips parted slightly, and the kiss deepened. It wasn't the aggressive, demanding kiss she might have expected from a man like him. It was restrained, filled with a suppressed intensity that made her knees weak. He kissed her like she was something precious, something fragile that he was terrified of breaking. Her heart raced against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She pressed closer to him, her fingers tightening on his shirt, pulling him down. Luca groaned low in his throat. a sound of surrender. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His mouth moved over hers with more urgency now, tasting her, claiming her. The stubble on his chin grazed her skin, a rough contrast to the softness of his lips. For a minute, there was no war. There was no Isabella. There was no sick mother or double shifts. There was only the heat of his body, the strength of his arms, and the taste of coffee and desire. Luca pulled back first. He did not go far. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. Maya clung to him, her own breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "I should not be doing this," Luca whispered, his voice rough. "I am dragging you deeper into the dark. You deserve better than this, better than me." Maya opened her eyes. She saw the guilt warring with the longing in his expression. She saw a man who believed he was poison. "I am not asking for better," Maya whispered back. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the tension in his jaw. "I do not regret it," she said firmly. Luca looked at her, his eyes burning with a mixture of hope and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something that might have changed the course of the night, but the world outside the candlelight crashed back in. 3 loud, urgent bangs shook the kitchen door. "Boss," it was Nico. His voice was not the calm, professional tone of a guard. It was high with panic. Luca pulled away from Maya instantly. The tenderness vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of cold, sharp alertness. He reached for the gun tucked into the waistband of his pants. "Enter," Luca commanded. Nico burst into the room, his flashlight cutting through the dimness, blinding them for a second. "We have a problem," Nico said, breathless. "The perimeter sensors just tripped, and Rafa just got a call from a contact at the precinct." "What is it?" Luca asked, stepping in front of Maya, shielding her instinctively. "Someone tipped the Valentis about the location," Nico said grimly. "They are not just looking for us anymore. They are 5 miles out and closing in fast. We have to move. Now." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. The warmth of the kiss evaporated, replaced by the icy grip of terror. Luca turned to her. There was no time for apologies, no time for soft words. "Get your coat," Luca ordered, his voice slipping back into the command of the dawn. "We are leaving." Maya nodded, her hands shaking as she moved to obey. But as she turned to run down the hallway, she felt Luca's hand catch her arm for just a second. A squeeze, a promise. Then he let go, and they were running into the dark. The tires of the black SUV crunched over gravel, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the deep woods. They had been driving for nearly an hour, winding away from the chaotic neon glow of Harborview and into the dense, pine-covered hills that bordered the north side of the city. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick mist that curled around the tree trunks like white smoke. Luca Santori killed the engine. The headlights cut out, plunging them into absolute darkness for a moment before eyes adjusted to the moonlight filtering through the canopy. "We are here," Luca said quietly. Maya Collins peered out the window. In front of them sat a structure that looked nothing like the sleek, fortified safe house they had just fled. It was a cabin, built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a deep gray. It sat on a small rise overlooking a lake that stretched out into the darkness, its surface smooth as black glass. "It looks abandoned," Maya whispered, clutching her coat tighter around herself. "It is not," Luca replied, unbuckling his seatbelt. "My grandfather built it 50 years ago. We keep it off the books. No digital footprint, no utility bills in the family name. It is the only place left where I know for a fact there are no cameras." He opened the door and stepped out, the cool night air rushing in. Maya followed, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The silence here was profound, broken only by the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant, mournful hoot of an owl. Despite the terror of the last 24 hours, the gunfire, the flight, the knowledge that men were hunting them, Maya felt a strange, involuntary pull toward the beauty of the place. Far across the lake, the city of Harborview was just a smear of golden light on the horizon, small and insignificant. It was hard to believe that somewhere in those lights, people were plotting murder. Nico and Rafa, who had followed in a second car, began unloading crates of equipment and supplies, their movements efficient and silent. They swept the perimeter, checking the tree line with thermal scopes, while Luca guided Maya up the wooden steps to the front porch. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, wood smoke, and dust. It was chilly, the air stagnant from months of disuse. Luca moved through the dark living room with the confidence of someone walking through a memory, finding a lantern on a side table and clicking it on. The soft, battery-powered glow revealed a rustic interior, heavy leather furniture, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, and shelves lined with old books. It felt like a home, not a fortress. "There are 3 bedrooms," Luca said, turning to face her. "But only the master bedroom has a reinforced door and a lock that can be secured from the inside. The others have standard latches." Maya looked at him, understanding dawning on her face. "We stay in the master," Luca stated, his voice devoid of suggestion but heavy with practicality. "I cannot guard you if you're down the hall." Maya nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Okay." The bedroom was cramped, dominated by a large 4-poster bed made of dark oak. There was barely enough room to walk around it. When Nico brought in their bags, the space shrank even further. Once the door was closed and the heavy steel bolt slid into place, the intimacy of the situation became a physical weight in the room. For the first 2 days, they lived in a state of high-wire tension. The cabin was a bubble of safety, but the air inside was thick with things unsaid. They fell into a routine born of necessity during the day. Luca huddled with Nico and Rafa in the living room, analyzing the data Elena sent them via encrypted channels. Maya tried to make herself useful, sweeping the dust from the floors and making simple meals from the canned goods they had brought. But the nights were the hardest. The bedroom became a dance of avoidance. To change clothes, they took turns, one standing by the window with their back turned while the other hurriedly dressed in the corner. "Turn around," Maya would whisper, clutching her shirt to her chest. Luca would stand rigid by the window, staring out at the dark lake, his hands clasped behind his back. "I am not looking," he would assure her, his voice rough, but even with eyes averted, the awareness was impossible to ignore. The room was too small. When they brushed past each other to get to the door or the bathroom, the heat of their bodies seemed to arc between them. Maya could smell him, the scent of the woods, the gun oil he used to clean his weapon, and the underlying, masculine scent of his skin. Every time he moved, the floorboards creaked, a constant reminder of his presence. They slept on opposite sides of the large bed, stiff and careful, a wide gulf of mattress between them. Yet, Maya would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of his breathing, deep and steady, and feel a treacherous urge to scoot closer to the warmth he radiated. On the 3rd evening, the fragile peace shattered. They were in the kitchen. Maya was stirring a pot of soup over the gas stove when Luca's secure phone buzzed on the table. It was a singular, harsh vibration that stopped all conversation. Nico and Rafa looked up from their cards. Luca reached for the phone, his face impassive. He read the message, and Maya watched his reaction carefully. She saw his shoulders stiffen. She saw the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the device. His jaw set hard, a muscle feathering in his cheek as he read the text a second time. "What is it, boss?" Nico asked, his hand drifting toward his holster. "It is her," Luca said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze the lake. "Isabella?" Rafa asked. "She sent a code we used to use," Luca said. "She wants to meet. Tonight, a neutral spot. The old carousel at the end of the public pier. It is a trap," Nico said immediately. "Maybe," Luca replied, staring at the screen. "Or maybe the feds are squeezing her harder than she expected, and she is looking for a way out. She says she has information on the Valenti leadership structure, information that could end the war." Maya stood by the stove, the wooden spoon motionless in her hand. She watched Luca's profile. He wasn't just calculating the risk, he was remembering. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not love, certainly, but a deep, jagged pain that hadn't healed. A hot, sharp spike of jealousy pierced Maya's chest. It surprised her with its intensity. She hated that this woman, this Isabella who had sold him out and tried to have him killed, could still command his attention with a single text message. She hated that they had secret codes and a shared history that Maya could never touch. And beneath the jealousy was a protective anger that made her want to grab the phone and throw it into the lake. "You are not actually going," Maya said, her voice cutting through the room. Luca turned to look at her, surprised by her tone. "I have to know if it is real. If she can give us the Valentis, we can stop running, or she can finish what she started in the restaurant," Maya snapped. Luca ignored her and turned back to his men. "We need to scout the location. Nico, you take the high ground on the warehouse roof overlooking the pier. Rafa, you stay in the car as getaway." "What about the girl?" Nico asked, jerking his chin toward Maya. Luca hesitated. He looked at Maya, then at the door, then back to the map on the table. "She stays here," Luca said. "It is too dangerous. We lock the cabin. She will be safe until we get back." "No," Nico argued. "If the Valentis tracked the phone, they could be on their way here right now. If we leave her alone, she's defenseless. We should take her, use her as a cover. A couple walking on the pier looks less suspicious than a lone man. I am not using her as a shield," Luca growled. "Then leave her," Rafa said. Maya slammed the spoon down on the counter. The noise echoed like a gunshot. "I am standing right here," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Stop talking about me like I'm a piece of luggage." She walked around the counter, marching up to Luca until she was forced to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. "I am not staying here to knit while you go get shot," she declared. "And I am not going to be your human shield. But if you think I am going to sit in this cabin alone, waiting for a hit squad to kick down the door while you are off meeting your ex-fiancé, you are out of your mind." Luca stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the set of her chin. She looked nothing like the terrified waitress who had cowered in the alley. She looked fierce. "You are coming," Luca decided abruptly. "But you stay in the car with Rafa. You do not step foot on that pier. Is that understood?" Maya held his gaze. "Understood." Luca nodded, then turned to his men. "Get the gear ready. We leave in 20 minutes. Nico and Rafa scrambled to pack the equipment. Luca turned and walked toward the bedroom. Maya followed him. Inside the room, the air was heavy. Luca moved to the bed, opening a black duffel bag to retrieve a fresh magazine for his pistol and a Kevlar vest. He moved mechanically, his mind clearly miles away. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. The jealousy was still simmering, but it was giving way to a profound sadness. "Do you still love her?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Luca froze. He held the vest in his hands, staring at the dark fabric. He did not look at her immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind rattling the window pane. Finally. Luca tossed the vest onto the bed and sat down next to her. He sat close, their knees almost touching, but he kept his gaze on the floor. "I do not love her," Luca said quietly. "I hate her. But hate is just as heavy as love. Maya, it ties you to a person just as tightly," he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "We were engaged for 2 years," he continued, his voice low and raspy. "But it was not a romance. It was a merger. Our fathers wanted it, but I tried to make it work. I wanted to build a life. But Isabella, she did not want a husband. She wanted a project." "A project?" Maya asked softly. "She wanted me to be legitimate," Luca said. "Not for the right reasons. Not because it is safer or moral, but because she wanted the social standing. She wanted to be a senator's wife, not a mobster's wife. She pushed me to cut corners, to betray old alliances, to move faster than was possible. When I told her I could not change history overnight, she looked at me with such disgust." He turned his head to look at Maya. The vulnerability in his eyes was stark. It was the look of a man who had been told, repeatedly, that he was not enough. "She told me I was a savage," Luca whispered, "that I would never be anything else." Maya's chest ached. She felt a physical pain for him, for the rejection he had carried around like a stone. She looked at his strong hands. his tired eyes, the sharp line of his jaw. She saw a man who protected his people, a man who had treated a waitress with dignity even while fleeing for his life. She reached out. She rested her hand over his. Her palm was warm against his cold skin. He flinched slightly, startled, but then settled into her touch. She was wrong, Maya said firmly. She leaned in, forcing him to look at her. You are not a savage, Luca. You are a man who was handed a terrible legacy and is trying to survive it. You deserve someone who sees who you are, not who they want you to be. You are not a stepping stone, and you are definitely not a project. Luca stared at her. Her words seemed to wash over him, cleansing wounds he hadn't realized were infected. He looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes. You see me, he murmured. Yes, Maya whispered. I see you. The air in the room changed, the tension that had been building for days, the awkwardness of the shared room, the brushes in the hallway, the adrenaline of the escape, suddenly crystallized into something undeniable. Luca leaned in, this time. There was no hesitation. There was no gentle testing of the waters. He kissed her hard. It was urgent, fueled by frustration, fear, and a longing that had been suppressed for too long. His mouth took hers with a hunger that stole her breath. Maya responded instantly, her own desire rising up to meet his. She opened to him, a small sound of need escaping her throat. Luca's hands moved from his lap to her waist, gripping her tightly, pulling her body against his. His fingers dug into the fabric of her shirt, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he let go. Maya's hands flew to his hair, her fingers threading through the thick, dark strands, pulling him closer. They tumbled back onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and frantic motion. The mattress groaned under their weight. Luca hovered over her, his body shielding hers, his weight heavy and grounding. He broke the kiss to look at her, his breathing ragged. His eyes were dark pools of desire, burning with an intensity that made Maya shiver. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with a trembling finger, then down the curve of her throat to her shoulder. Maya, he rasped, his voice rough with need. He lowered his head, trailing slow, reverent kisses along the sensitive skin of her neck. Maya arched toward him, her head falling back into the pillows, her hands clutching his broad shoulders. Luca, she breathed, saying his name like a prayer. He paused. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. His chest was heaving, his heart pounding against hers. He needed to know. He needed to be sure. He was a man who took things by force in his professional life, but here, with her, he would take nothing that wasn't freely given. Are you sure? He asked, his voice strained. We can stop. Maya looked up at him. She saw the question in his eyes, the respect that underpinned the desire. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips swollen from his kisses, her eyes shining with certainty. She lifted a hand and cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing over his cheekbone. I am sure, she whispered. She nodded, a small, definitive movement. Luca let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he walked into the restaurant that first night. He lowered himself back to her, capturing her lips again. Slower this time. Deeper. The room filled with the sound of their ragged breaths and the rustle of clothes being discarded. The darkness outside the cabin pressed against the windows, cold and unyielding, but inside, in the center of the large oak bed, there was only fire. The world narrowed down to the sensation of skin on skin, the whispered names, and the desperate, affirming act of being alive together in the face of death. Later. The room was quiet. The lantern in the living room had been turned off, leaving the bedroom in near total darkness, save for the pale moonlight striping the floor. They lay tangled under the heavy quilt, limbs intertwined. Luca was on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other wrapped protectively around Maya, who rested her head on his chest. She could hear the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her ear, a rhythm that lulled her into a state of drowsy contentment. The storm of passion had passed, leaving behind a profound stillness. It was a strange contrast to the violence that awaited them outside these walls. In a few hours, They would have to get up. They would have to put on Kevlar vests and load guns. They would have to drive to a pier and confront the ghosts of his past. But for now, there was this. Maya shifted slightly, pressing a soft kiss to the skin over his heart. "We are going to be okay," she whispered into the darkness. Luca moved his arm, his hand finding her hair and stroking it gently. "I will make sure of it," he replied deeply. He turned his head to press his lips against her forehead. It was a tender gesture, one that spoke of possession and promise, internally. Luca made a vow. He stared up at the shadows on the ceiling, his mind sharpening again. He thought of Isabella. He thought of the Valentis. He thought of the federal agents. They wanted to use him. They wanted to destroy him. And now they had given him something to lose. He tightened his arm around Maya, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. He would not let Isabella use her. He would not let anyone touch her. If he had to burn the entire city of Harborview to the ground to keep this woman safe, he would strike the match himself. "Sleep," Luca murmured. "I have you." Maya closed her eyes, the warmth of his body shielding her from the cold night air. And for the first time in days, she slept without dreaming of running. The morning sun over the lake was deceptive. It painted the water in shades of gold and amber, casting a serene, picturesque glow over the secluded cabin that felt worlds away from the grime and violence of Harborview. For 3 days, this place had been a sanctuary, a suspended reality where Maya Collins could almost pretend she was not a woman marked for death. Luca had left early, before the mist had even cleared from the pines, to meet a contact at a roadside diner 10 miles out, a necessary risk to secure encrypted comms equipment. The cabin felt hollow without his brooding, protective presence, but the silence was also a relief. It gave Maya space to breathe. She stepped out the back door, a wicker basket of laundry braced against her hip. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and cedar. She moved toward the clothesline strung between 2 ancient oak trees, the wet fabric of Luca's shirts heavy and cold in her hands. She pinned a white dress shirt to the line, the simple domestic action grounding her. It was so normal, so safe. Then the world disintegrated. There was no sound at first, only a sudden, violent displacement of air that slammed into her back like a physical blow. The ground beneath her feet bucked, throwing her forward. She hit the grass hard. The wind knocked out of her lungs, just as the sound caught up, a thunderous, tearing roar that seemed to split the sky open. A massive fireball erupted from the front of the cabin, visible even over the roofline. Shattered glass and splintered wood rained down around her, pattering against the leaves like hail. Maya scrambled to her hands and knees, her ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. She stared at the cabin. The front porch was gone. Black smoke billowed into the clear blue sky, blotting out the sun. The driveway, the car bomb, had been at the driveway. She crawled toward the cover of the tree line, her instincts screaming. If she had been inside, making coffee in the kitchen like she planned, she would be dead. If she had been on the front porch waiting for Luca. She huddled behind the thick trunk of an oak tree, trembling violently, watching the flames lick at the log structure. Time lost its meaning. It could have been minutes or hours before she heard the screech of tires tearing over gravel, audible even through the ringing in her ears. A vehicle skidded to a halt near the smoking crater of the driveway. A car door slammed. "Maya!" The voice was raw, a terrifying sound of pure panic. "Maya!" She stumbled out from behind the tree, coughing as the smoke drifted into the backyard. "I am here!" she screamed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Luca came running around the side of the cabin. He looked like a man possessed. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt unbuttoned, his face pale beneath a sheen of sweat and ash. When he saw her standing there, covered in dirt but standing, he stopped dead. His chest heaved. In 2 strides, he bridged the distance between them. He did not ask if she was okay. He needed to verify it with his hands. He grabbed her, his palms framing her face, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of soot from her cheek. He ran his hands down her arms, checking for blood, for broken bones, his touch frantic and desperate. "You are alive," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I saw the smoke from the road. I thought I was too late." He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. His embrace was crushing, fueled by a terror she had never seen in him before. This was not the calculated fear of a mob boss losing an asset. This was the terrified relief of a man who had almost lost his heart. "They found us," Maya whispered against his shirt, her body finally beginning to shake as the shock wore off. "We are leaving," Luca said, his voice hardening into steel. "Now." They relocated to a fortified industrial compound near the shipping yards, a gray, imposing building that smelled of salt and diesel. It lacked the beauty of the cabin, but it had reinforced concrete walls and armed men at every entrance. The atmosphere inside was suffocating. Luca was enraged. The attack on the cabin had been a personal violation, a message that nowhere was safe. He convened a war council in the main operations room, a windowless space dominated by a large steel table covered in maps and laptops. Maya sat in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, watching them. Nico and Rafa were pacing, their hands on their weapons, eager for blood. Elena, the strategist, sat calmly at the table, though her eyes were sharp. "They missed," Luca said, his voice low and dangerous, "and now they are going to pay. I want the Valentis burned out of their holes. I want every business they own turned to ash. Boss, we cannot just go to war in the streets," Elena warned, her tone measured. "That is exactly what they want. I do not care what they want," Luca shouted, slamming his hand onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "They tried to kill her. Elena, they put a bomb where she sleeps. I am done with strategy. I want them dead." Elena did not flinch. She tapped a key on her laptop and spun the screen around. "You need to look at this," she said. "My contact in the federal building came through. We know why Isabella is pushing so hard." Luca stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. "The federal task force is not just investigating," Elena explained. "They have Isabella on a RICO predicate. They have her for money laundering and conspiracy. They gave her a choice. Give them Luca Santori on a silver platter, or go to federal prison for 30 years. She is scared," Rafa muttered. "She is terrified," Elena corrected, "and she is using the Valentis as her muscle. She promised them your territory if they help her deliver you to the feds. But she is running out of time. The task force gave her 48 hours to make the drop. That is why the bomb happened. She's getting sloppy. She is desperate." Luca straightened up, pinching the bridge of his nose. "So she is cornered. A cornered animal bites." Silence fell over the room. The men looked ready to grab their guns and start shooting, but there was no clear target. The enemy was desperation itself. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked at the map on the table. She looked at Luca's back, tense and coiled with fury. She knew that feeling. She knew what it was like to be trapped, to feel like every option led to ruin. She cleared her throat. "She wants safety," Maya said. The room turned to her. Nico looked annoyed that she was speaking, but Luca turned with immediate focus. "What did you say?" Luca asked. "Isabella," Maya said, her voice gaining strength. "She does not care about the Valentis. She does not care about the law. She just wants to be safe. She wants to stay out of prison." "And?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. "And when people are that desperate for safety, they believe anything that promises it," Maya said. She stood up, letting the blanket fall. "You are trying to fight her with guns, but you should be fighting her with what she wants." Luca watched her, his expression softening from rage to intrigue. "Go on. Feed her a lie," Maya suggested. "Tell her you have something that can save her. Records. Evidence that proves the Valentis were the ones laundering the money, not her. Tell her you are willing to trade it for peace. She won't believe I would help her," Luca said. "She will if you tell her it is the only way you can disappear," Maya countered. "Tell her you are leaving the life. Tell her you are done. Tell her you will give her the evidence to bury the Valentis and get the feds off her back, in exchange for her letting you walk away." Elena looked at Maya, a slow smile spreading across her face. If she believes she can hand the Valentis to the feds and clear her own name, Elena mused, she will bring the task force to arrest the Valentis, Luca finished, realizing the brilliance of it. And she will bring the Valentis to kill you, Maya added darkly. Exactly, Luca said, his eyes lighting up with a cold, predatory fire. We get them all in the same place. Isabella, the Valentis, the feds. We make them collide. And while they are tearing each other apart, Rafa said, grinning, we slip out the back door. It is a trap, Luca said, looking at Maya with a mixture of pride and intense protectiveness. A perfect trap. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The safe house transformed into a command center. Maya was no longer the outsider sitting in the corner. She was pulled into the inner circle. They stood over the large steel table, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows. Maps of the waterfront were spread out, red markers circling potential ambush points. Maya stood next to Luca, their arms brushing as they leaned over the blueprints of a derelict warehouse in the old district. Here, Luca said, pointing to a catwalk. The camera angles need to be wide. We need clear footage of Isabella handing the documents to the agents. We need proof she was working both sides. And here, Maya said, pointing to a service tunnel. This exit leads to the drainage outflow. It is tight, but it comes out half a mile down the coast. Luca looked at her. He smelled of smoke and exhaustion, but his eyes were alive. He moved his hand to cover hers on the table. A brief, grounding touch amidst the chaos. You have a mind for this, he murmured, half impressed, half sad. I just want to survive, Maya replied quietly. The planning continued late into the night. Around 2 a.m, the adrenaline began to crash. The men went to check the perimeter, and Elena retired to a side room to draft the fake documents they would use as bait. Luca signaled to Maya, "Come, you need air." He led her out a side door onto a metal balcony that overlooked the shipping channel. The air here was heavy with salt and the smell of tar, but the breeze coming off the black water was cool. The lights of Harborview reflected on the waves, a shimmering city that looked peaceful only from a distance. Maya shivered, the cool air biting through her thin shirt. Luca immediately took off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. He stepped in behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his stubble grazing her neck. Maya leaned into him, letting his solid weight support her. I am scared, Maya admitted, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. I know, Luca said, his arms tightening. But, she continued, looking out at the dark horizon, I think I am more scared of going back. Back to what? Luca asked. To the diner, she said, to the double shifts, to serving pasta to people who do not see me, to being powerless, tonight, in there, looking at the maps. I felt like I had control over my own life for the first time, even if it is dangerous. Luca turned her in his arms so she was facing him. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the harsh lines of worry. I do not want you to live in fear, Luca said, his voice rough with emotion. And I do not want you to live in boredom. I want a future where you do not have to choose between the two. He reached up and cupped her face. I am going to get us out of this. Maya, I am going to burn the bridges that need burning. And then we are going to build something else. Something that isn't soaked in blood. A life where we can sleep at night. Do you think we can? Maya asked. I think, Luca said, his eyes searching hers. That with you. I can do anything. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was soft at first, the taste of the salt air mixing with the warmth of his mouth. The breeze tugged at her hair, but she felt anchored by his hands on her hips. The kiss grew deeper, lingering under the vast, starless sky. Their bodies swayed slowly, moving to the rhythm of the water lapping against the pilings below. It was a dance of two survivors finding solace in the eye of the hurricane. Luca's hands slid down to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Maya rose on her tiptoes, her arms encircling his neck, deepening the contact. The heat between them flared, chasing away the chill of the night. His touch grew more insistent, his hand sliding up her spine, pressing her closer as if he could merge their bodies into one. "Let's go inside," Luca whispered against her lips. Maya nodded, breathless. They moved back into the safe house, leaving the cold night behind for the warmth of the temporary bedroom, shutting the door on the war and the world for a few more precious hours. The next day moved with the grim precision of a countdown. The trap was set. Elena had made the call to Isabella, playing the part of a terrified underling offering a deal. Isabella had taken the bait, her desperation blinding her to the risks. The meeting was set for midnight at the old cannery warehouse on the West Docks. The men spent the afternoon prepping weapons and checking the hidden cameras that would broadcast the meeting to a secure server. It was a high-tech execution of a very old game. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, the atmosphere in the safe house shifted from planning to preparation. Kevlar vests were strapped on, magazines were loaded. Luca stood by the door, adjusting his cuffs. He looked every inch the Sicilian dawn, imposing, lethal, and calm. But when he saw Maya walking toward him, the mask slipped. She was dressed in dark, functional clothes, her hair tied back. She looked ready to run or ready to fight. "You stay in the van with Rafa until the signal," Luca ordered, his voice tight. "I know the plan." "Luca," Maya said. He stepped forward and pulled her into a fierce embrace. He held her so tight it hurt, pressing his forehead against hers. They stood there for a long moment, breathing the same air, their hearts beating in a syncopated rhythm of fear and love. "Listen to me," Luca whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "No matter what happens tonight, no matter how the cards fall, meeting you, that note in the breadbasket, it is the one thing I would not change." Maya's eyes shone with unshed tears. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket. "Do not talk like that," she said fiercely. "You are coming back. You hear me? You come back to me. Do not make me regret that note." Luca managed a small, crooked smile. "I will come back," he promised. He kissed her one last time, hard, desperate, and searing. Then he pulled away, turned, and walked out into the night to end the war, leaving Maya standing in the silence, praying that his promise was stronger than the bullets waiting for him. The rain over the Harborview docks was a relentless, cold drizzle that slicked the asphalt and turned the world into a blur of gray and black. The old cannery warehouse loomed against the skyline like the skeletal remains of a leviathan, its corrugated metal skin rattling in the wind off the water. Luca Santori stepped out of the shadows and into the cavernous main bay of the warehouse. He was not wearing the bespoke Italian suits that had defined his public image for a decade. Tonight, he wore dark, tactical clothing, heavy boots, cargo pants, and a fitted black jacket that concealed the Kevlar vest beneath. He looked less like a Don and more like a soldier walking onto a battlefield he had already mapped out in his head. He was not alone, though his entourage was small. Nico flanked his left, carrying a duffel bag that supposedly contained the Valenti records. Two other loyal men secured the rear, their eyes scanning the high catwalks where rusted machinery hung like sleeping bats. What the others could not see were the micro cameras embedded in the buttons of Luca's jacket and positioned in the rafters hours ago by his scout team. Every angle was being recorded. Every word was being transmitted to a secure server in a basement across the city, where Elena sat ready to pull the trigger on a digital bomb. Isabella De Luca emerged from the gloom at the far end of the warehouse. She looked immaculate, as always, her trench coat belted tightly at the waist, her hair perfectly coiffed despite the damp air. But as she drew closer, Luca saw the cracks in the porcelain. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twitching slightly by her sides. She stopped 10 feet away, flanked by two Valenti enforcers who looked nervous to be standing so close to Luca Santori. "You came," Isabella said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I told you I would," Luca replied, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Isabella took a step forward, her expression twisting into a mask of tragic necessity. "You have to understand, Luca. I did not want this. I never wanted to hurt you. but you were dragging us all down. You refused to evolve. The feds were closing in, and you were too stubborn to make a deal. I did what I had to do. Self-preservation is not a crime." Luca looked at her, seeing the woman he had once intended to marry. He saw the cold calculation she tried to pass off as sorrow. "You call it preservation," Luca said quietly. "I call it cowardice. You sold your family to a rival syndicate. You sold me to the government, and you did it all so you could keep your penthouse and your social standing." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger, the mask slipping. "I did it to survive," she snapped. "And if you hand over those records, you can survive too. The Valentis will let you walk away. The task force will look the other way. We can end this tonight." Luca stared at her, silence stretching between them. "You are right," Luca said. "We are ending this tonight." The sound of heavy engines cut through the rain outside. Headlights swept across the high windows of the warehouse. The heavy bay doors rolled open with a screech of rusted metal. A convoy of black SUVs swarmed into the loading dock, tires squealing on the wet concrete. Men in windbreakers emblazoned with federal agents spilled out, weapons raised. At the same moment, the side doors kicked open, and more Valenti soldiers poured in, guns drawn, expecting to ambush Luca. It was a standoff, a powder keg, high above the warehouse, on a ridge overlooking the docks. Maya sat in the back of a surveillance van, staring at a bank of monitors. Her hands were gripped white-knuckled on the edge of the console. "Oh my God," she whispered, "they are all there." Rafa, sitting in the driver's seat with a headset on, watched the feeds with grim satisfaction. "Just wait," he muttered. "Wait for the signal." On the screen. Maya saw Isabella's face falter. She saw the panic as the woman realized that the feds and the Valentis were in the same room, and neither side looked happy. Luca stood in the center of the storm, perfectly calm. He raised his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in a gesture of control. He turned to the lead federal agent, a man with a buzz cut and a leveled rifle. "You are looking for the Valenti money trail," Luca shouted over the confusion. "And you," he turned to the Valenti captain, "you are looking for the rat who has been feeding your operations to the police for 6 months." Luca kicked the duffel bag at his feet. It slid across the wet floor, stopping between the two groups. "It is all in there," Luca announced, his voice booming. "But it is not my records. It is hers." He pointed a finger at Isabella. "Isabella has been playing both of you," Luca continued, his voice cutting like a knife. "She took Valenti money to pay off federal informants. She gave federal evidence to the Valentis to eliminate her competition. She is the leak. She is the liability." Isabella's face went pale. "That is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill. "Kill him!" "He is lying!" Luca reached into his jacket, slowly, and pulled out a small remote. "Elena, do it," he said into his lapel microphone. Instantly, the phones of every federal agent and every Valenti soldier in the room buzzed. Across the city, Elena hit the enter key, the incriminating audio files, the bank transfers, the emails between Isabella and both sides were blasted to the personal devices of everyone in the room and simultaneously leaked to 3 major news networks in the warehouse. The lead agent looked down at his phone. The Valenti captain did the same. The realization hit them at the same time. Isabella backed away, shaking her head. "No," she whimpered. "No, wait." A young, nervous Valenti soldier, sensing the betrayal, panicked. He raised his gun and fired a shot toward Isabella. The crack of the gunshot broke the dam. Chaos erupted. The federal agents opened fire on the Valentis. The Valentis returned fire. Luca and Nico dove behind a stack of steel shipping crates as the air filled with the deafening roar of automatic weapons. "Go!" Luca yelled to his men. "Route B!" They moved low and fast, weaving through the maze of crates toward the side exit they had mapped out. In the van, Maya watched the monitors in horror. The warehouse had turned into a war zone. She saw Luca moving, saw him guiding his men. But then she saw something else. 3 Valenti soldiers had broken away from the main firefight. They were sprinting down the side corridor, the exact corridor Luca was heading toward. "They are cutting him off!" Maya shouted. "Rafa, look, they are cutting him off!" Rafa cursed, reaching for his radio. "Boss, you have bogeys at the exit. Turn back. There is no turning back." Luca's voice crackled over the radio. Gunfire popping in the background. "We are pinned." Maya looked at the screen. Luca was trapped between the feds behind him and the ambush squad ahead of him. He was going to walk right into a kill box. "I have to go," Maya said. She grabbed the spare pistol from the dashboard. "No!" Rafa shouted, grabbing her arm. "You stay here. That is the order. Let go of me," Maya screamed, wrenching her arm free with a strength that surprised him. "He's going to die if I do not do something." She didn't wait for him to argue. She threw open the van door and sprinted into the rain. The distance to the warehouse was only 100 yards, but it felt like miles. Her boots slammed against the wet pavement, mud splashing up her legs, her heart pounded in her throat, a frantic drumbeat of terror and determination. She was not a soldier. She was a waitress. But she was the only one who could see the angle. She reached the side entrance of the warehouse, a rusted metal door that was slightly ajar. She burst through it, her chest heaving. She was in the corridor. Ahead of her, she saw the 3 Valenti gunmen. They had their backs to her, their weapons trained on the corner where Luca was about to emerge. They waited in silence, fingers on triggers. Maya raised the gun. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She gripped the weapon with both hands, trying to steady it, remembering the hurried lesson Luca had given her in the cabin. "Hey!" she screamed. The gunman closest to her spun around, surprised to see a woman standing there soaked in rain. "Luca!" Maya shouted his name as a warning. The gunman raised his rifle toward her. Maya squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked hard in her hand, the sound deafening in the narrow hallway. She squeezed her eyes shut for a split second. She missed the center mass, but the bullet clipped the gunman's shoulder. He cried out, spinning away, his rifle clattering to the floor. The distraction was enough. Luca came around the corner low and fast. He saw the gunman distracted by Maya. He didn't hesitate. 2 controlled shots dropped the standing threats. He rushed forward, kicking the weapons away, and then he was on her. "Maya!" He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. His eyes were wide, a mix of furious outrage and overwhelming relief. "I told you to stay in the car," he roared, though his hands were pulling her closer, checking her for holes. "You were trapped," Maya yelled back, her voice hysterical. "They were waiting for you." Luca looked down the hallway, then back at her. He realized she was right. If she hadn't distracted them, he would be dead on the concrete. He let out a rough breath and kissed her hard on the forehead. "You are crazy," he growled. "Come on." They moved toward the exit, Nico and the others close behind. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of the shadows near the loading dock door. It was Isabella. She was disheveled, her coat torn, clutching a briefcase of cash she had hidden. She was trying to reach a parked car, trying to slip away while the feds and Valentis slaughtered each other. She saw Luca. She froze. Luca raised his weapon. He had a clear shot. He could end it right there. Isabella stared at him, her eyes pleading, knowing she had lost everything. "Please," she mouthed. Sirens wailed outside, getting louder. Blue lights flashed against the wet walls. The federal agents were securing the perimeter. Luca looked at her. He looked at the gun in his hand. Then he looked at Maya standing beside him, breathless and brave. He realized he didn't need to kill Isabella. Killing her would be mercy. Leaving her to the consequences of her own ambition was justice. He lowered the gun. He stepped aside, clearing the line of sight for the squad of agents rushing through the main doors. "Freeze! Federal agents!" Isabella spun around, but it was too late. She was surrounded. She dropped the briefcase, her hands shaking as she raised them in surrender. The agents swarmed her, cuffing her, dragging her away from the money she had sold her soul for. Luca did not watch. He took Maya's hand. "Let's go," he said. They slipped out the side door into the rainy night, vanishing into the shadows of the shipping containers just as the news helicopters began to circle overhead. 3 days later, the sunlight streaming into the apartment was bright and clean. It was a modest place on the 3rd floor of a brick building in a quiet neighborhood, miles away from the docks and the penthouses of downtown Harborview. Luca sat on a simple beige sofa, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. He held a cup of coffee. Watching the television mounted on the wall, the screen showed Isabella De Luca being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, her face hidden from the flashing cameras. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Mafia informant denied bail. Santori crime family dissolved." The news anchor was speaking excitedly about the massive trove of evidence that had been leaked, implicating dozens of high-ranking Valenti members and corrupt federal officials. The underworld of Harborview had been shattered overnight. Luca turned the TV off. The silence in the room was peaceful. Maya walked in from the small kitchen. She was no longer wearing an apron or a uniform. She wore a soft yellow sweater and held a rolled-up set of blueprints. "Is it over?" she asked, nodding toward the dark screen. "For them." "Yes," Luca said. "They will be fighting in court for the next 10 years. Isabella will likely never see the outside of a cell again." "And for us?" Maya asked. Luca set his coffee down and stood up. He walked over to her, his movements easy and relaxed. The tension that had defined his posture for years was gone. "I transferred the last of the clean assets this morning." He said, "The illicit accounts are closed, the properties are sold. What we have left is legitimate. It is enough to start over." He reached out and took the blueprints from her hand, unrolling them on the small dining table. It was a layout for a commercial space, a corner unit with big windows and a professional kitchen. The Collins Cafe. Luca read the label, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It is small," Maya said quickly, feeling a sudden wave of shyness, "but the location is good. And I have ideas for the menu. No frozen bread, everything fresh. It is perfect," Luca said softly. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a warmth that rivaled the sunlight. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "You are tying yourself to a man with a heavy past. Maya, even if I walk forward, the shadow is long." Maya looked at the blueprints, then at him. She saw the man who had protected her in the alley, the man who had refused to use her as a shield, the man who had walked away from an empire to be with her. "I am not afraid of shadows," she said. "As long as you are the one standing next to me." Luca pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I am not going anywhere," he vowed. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a deep, sure kiss, filled with the promise of ordinary days. There was no gunfire in the background, no sirens, no ticking clock, just the dust motes spinning in the light and the beat of two hearts that had survived the storm. 6 months later, the bell above the door chimed, but this time, it didn't signal danger. It signaled a customer. The space smelled of roasted coffee beans and vanilla. The walls were painted a warm cream, and the morning light flooded through the clean glass windows. Maya wiped the counter, humming a soft tune. She looked up as Luca walked out of the back office. He was carrying a box of inventory, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on his cheek. He looked happy. He set the box down and walked over to her. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "We need to open," Maya whispered, smiling up at him. "In a minute," Luca said. He leaned down and kissed her, a lingering sweetness that made the world outside disappear. Then, he walked to the front door. He flipped the sign from close to open. He turned back to her, and for the first time in his life, Luca Santori was exactly where he wanted to be. He locked the door from the inside, not to keep enemies out, but to keep the moment in just a little longer. He walked back to her, and together, they stood in the sunlit cafe, ready to serve the first cup of coffee in a life that was finally, truly theirs. Thank you so much for reading this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Luca and Maya as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and tell me which country or city you are listening from. If you enjoyed this series, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more intense, emotional, and thrilling tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. Thank you for your support.